Hi, and welcome to the second in our testimony series. So this time I'm going to share with you someone's testimony who I've never actually met, but I've been encouraged by his faith through his writing. He is a well-known Christian author. He's actually he's a New York Times best-selling author, Lee Strobel, and he wrote this book along with many others. It's called The Case for Christ. And it's a journalist's personal investigation of the evidence of Jesus. So Lee Strobel was an atheist, and he had a journalism degree from the University of Missouri, a Master of Studies in Law from Yale Law School, and was the award-winning legal editor of the Chicago Tribune. So being that kind of person and being in that job and that role where he was used to looking through cases, finding the facts and reporting them, that's what he took into his investigation of Christianity. And it's a fascinating book. It's quite a chunky one, but it's really good. He does have other ones. He has kids' versions, actually, but he also has The Case for Christ for students, which I think is a bit smaller. And he has ones that are like The Case for the Creator, Case for Christmas, Case for Easter, and it focuses just on those specifically, so it's a bit of a smaller book. But he decided to investigate Christianity and find out what the evidence pointed to. He wanted to know the facts. He wanted to know the truth. And he's got a very unique perspective on that. He hunted down some of the leading experts about the New Testament, went over it with a fine-tooth comb to see, can we actually trust these translations? Is this what it originally said? Can we trust these eyewitnesses? He went and looked at the archaeology evidence. These places it talked about, did they exist? He looked into the physical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus, and he goes through it all like he would a legal case. And it's a particularly good book if, like me, you enjoy programmes like Criminal Minds and things, or any legal dramas or courtroom films or TV shows, because at the beginning of each chapter he talks about a real case that he reported on, and it's fascinating. And he will take whichever aspect of that case, whether it's the credibility of the eyewitness or the physical evidence, and he will say, well, just like in that case, this is what I applied when I was looking into this aspect of Christianity. So it's really fascinating, and it's just really, it's very strengthening I found it very strengthening to my faith to see just how much evidence there is for Jesus. I had come to faith before I read it, but just hearing some of these accounts, you think, wow, that's incredible, just how much weight there is behind it. And so I would recommend the book, but I'm going to share a little bit about his testimony that I got from a documentary that he's done. You can find it on YouTube. It's the Case for Christ documentary, and it is just over an hour long because it's got the interviews with these people. But if you want just to hear his testimony said by himself and his wife, Leslie, the very first bit of the video and the very last bit is where their personal stories come in. So you can look that up yourself if you want. It's on YouTube. And I'm just going to read the parts of his testimony that they shared. So Lee said, as an atheist, he thought it was an absurd idea that there was a loving God, not even worth his time. He thought if Jesus did exist, he was probably a nice guy, an excellent teacher, but he certainly wasn't the Messiah, and he certainly wasn't the Son of God. His wife, Leslie, was spiritual neutral. She was more of an agnostic, whereas Lee was antagonistic towards Christians as an atheist. And Leslie said when she first started going to church, Lee reacted very negatively. He basically told her this is not what he had signed up for when they got married. He had life planned that did not include church. And he says he thought his wife would turn into some sort of religious prude and thought no good can come of this. But in the months that followed, he began to see positive changes in her behaviour, her character, and how she related to the world and others. So when she invited him to go to church with her in January 1980, he thought, you know what, I'm going to go, and I'm going to get her out of this cult she's began to follow. Leslie said he went in with his reporter's notebook, ready to take notes, to scrutinise it, and to find the scandal. The pastor preached that day on basic Christianity and just systematically laid out what Christians believe. And Lee said his mind was blown as he had all these misconceptions, and the pastor straightened some of them out. He said he still walked out as an atheist. He didn't convince him that day at all that God exists. But secondly, I realised if this is true, it has huge implications for my life. Leslie said for her, it was in her heart that she wanted God to be real and she wanted to have that relationship, but Lee needed documentation. He wanted to know the facts that were true. So he used his position as a journalist to contact scholars and ask them about the New Testament. He says he thought it would be easy to exploit the ridiculousness behind Christianity, but as it turned out, it took him almost 2 years to investigate all the issues. He says it really was, in a sense, the most exciting story I had ever pursued as a journalist. So the evidence accumulated over time until November 1981, so almost 2 years later, which is when Lee says he reached a critical mass. He says, I remember going alone in my room. I took out a yellow legal pad and I put a line down the middle. On one side, I started to list all the evidence I had encountered for Jesus Christ being the Son of God. And on the other side, all the negative evidence against that. And I wrote page after page, and finally I put my pen down and I said, wait a minute. In the light of this avalanche of evidence pointing towards the truth of Christianity, it would actually require more faith for me to maintain my atheism than to become a follower of Jesus Christ. And so that's the moment that I decided, consistent with the evidence, the most logical, the most rational step I could take was a step of faith in the same direction the evidence was pointing, and put my trust in Jesus. Leslie said she was absolutely delighted. Her and lots of her friends had been praying for him, and she said this was the start of a transformation in all parts of him and his life. Apparently their 5-year-old daughter actually saw this transformation of Lee as he became this Christian follower of Jesus, and how that changes you from the inside out, that she actually went to her Sunday school teacher and said, I want Jesus to do in me what he's done in my daddy. And Lee says, Jesus said, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. And that's my story. Someone who said, I'm going to investigate this stuff and let it take me wherever the evidence will. And I discovered in the end that Jesus made the claim that he is the truth and that everything hinges on his identity. In fact, everything hinges on the resurrection. So that's Lee's story. The atheist determined to find the holes in the science, in the evidence, in the truth of Christianity, but instead he realised the evidence actually pointed more to Jesus, and it required more faith to stay an atheist than it did to follow where the evidence pointed, and he turned to Christ. Wonderful book. I would totally recommend it. In fact, I might do another little video where it's just me reading the introduction, so you'll hear one of his legal cases and him talking about the start of his journey to discover Jesus for himself. So there we go. That is Lee Strobel's testimony.